Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you very much for attending this joint webinar between OSG and the Bressler Group. The title for our presentation today is Developing Successful Innovations, a Case Study for Collaborative Discipline and Creativity. You will experience during this webinar a joint effort between two firms that reflect the ability to take what is a more disciplined uh, approach to understanding innovation and where to bring innovation and supporting it more effectively with a creative solution for how to execute and make sure that the product or solution developed out of this joint effort is a complete success. Our presenters today, I'll introduce myself. My name is Sukumar. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for OSG. My background, I have spent extensive amount of time working with companies across multiple industry verticals and helping them successfully innovate and bring new products and solutions to the marketplace. I was a professor of marketing where I taught marketing strategy, global new product development, and several other courses at a number of different MBA programs before I decided to leave academia to found OSG. With me today is my colleague, Matthew Turpal, and I'm going to turn it over to him to introduce himself. Matthew?
Yep, great. Thanks, Sukumar. Yeah, so my name is Matthew Turpal. I'm one of three managing partners at Bressler Group. We'll talk in a few minutes about what Bressler Group specializes in, but just by way of background, my background is in industrial design. I was an industrial designer when I started my career, and I've done industrial design work for about 20 years at this point, a little more than 20 years. And just in terms of journey through, becoming a managing partner, also I started my career as a traditional industrial designer. I was more focused on solving problems and less so on making sure the problems that I was solving were actually, adequate or really made sense for the particular project that I was working on. And I can say that, over the years, I've worked on a number of projects that never went anywhere. And for me, as I was growing up as a professional and a practitioner, it was a growing frustration. And that's the reason why I decided to do something. And at Bressler Group, my role today is really to help develop the front-end user research capabilities from a qualitative standpoint. So my role is to oversee design strategy, industrial design, as well as interaction design and user research at Bressler Group. So that's me in a nutshell in terms of introduction.
Thank you, Matthew. If you look at the partnership between the two companies, it's like making sure that your golf swing is going all the way and you're carrying forward that golf swing to achieve your handicap. So here it is. Let us tell you a little bit more about us, OSG. We refer to ourselves as a catalyst for customer-centric growth. It's the outside-in thinking. It's the ability to understand how to change customer behaviors in the future. It is the ability to understand not only customer needs and expectations today, but also what might it be in the future, and together then be able to bring that outside-in thinking to the development and launch of new innovations and new products. Our team is a very strong team across multiple countries in the US, in the UAE, in the UK, as well as in Asia Pacific. Our work tends to span across multiple verticals, from life sciences to retail, consumer packaged goods, consumer goods, as well as financial services and energy. We've worked across many different client engagements and have delivered collectively and cumulatively across the many different engagements more than $80 billion in growth for our clients. We use some very innovative tools that are published, that are validated, and that are used extensively to be able to uncover the mental accounting that customers go through, that consumers go through, in order to bring that to the fore and be able to use that in design and innovations. Let me turn it over to Matthew. Matthew?
Sure. So Bressler Group, in contrast, is a product development company. And we specialize if we simplify, about 50% of our business is consumer products, and the other 50% is medical devices. And we've been doing this for quite a long time. Bressler Group was first founded in 1970 as Design for Medicine. And so we have more than 48 years at this point of professional experience working across multiple different industries. We're positioned as a mid-sized product development company with currently about 65 design professionals. And there's really two metrics that we keep track of that help us gauge basically our ability to innovate from a design and aesthetic standpoint. It's the number of design awards that we've won over the years, and we've won more than 100 at this stage. And from a true measure of innovation, we keep track of the number of patents that we've authored or co-authored with our clients, most of which are utility patents. And at this stage, we've developed more than 230 for our clients. So as I mentioned, we specialize in product development, which means that in most cases, we tend to take a lot of our design all the way through production. So as a result, we understand what goes into development, and we understand the risks associated with bringing a product to market. And we understand the investments that a lot of our clients end up making on these big development programs. So ever since its inception, Bressler Group has always strived to reduce the risk for our clients, coming up with processes that would help take the risk out of the equation. And this is one of the reasons why we heavily invested in front-end user research capabilities, where we put really the user at the center of all of our processes so that we can make sure we discover unmet user need and really drive the process in a very disciplined way. But in nature, the work that we do here at Bressler Group is highly qualitative, and this is where there's a great deal of synergies between Bressler Group and OSG, who can lend its quantitative expertise to the product development process.
Thank you, Matthew. So, before I jump into this slide, I want to make a statement that says 3 reasons why new innovations fail. The first reason happens to be poor or lack of insights. The second reason happens to be more related to creating differentiation and making sure that product development and the execution of that is done correctly. And then the last reason why innovations fail happens to be lack of effort. And we want to take you through this journey to make sure, as Matthew just said, we want to make sure you minimize the risk of failure at any of those for any of those 3 reasons. So let us start you right here with how we go through the Bressler and OSG collaborative approach. And it starts with the unmet user needs, and I'll have Matthew talk a little bit more about it, which then gets handed over to being able to generate opportunities for innovations, being able to identify key benefits, being able to identify the jobs and outcomes that customers go through and what their pain points are along the journey that they take. And finally, to quantify and validate that using a very powerful methodology and technology that we'll talk about in a little bit. This collaborative effort allows us to define problem statements, identify unmet needs, and begin to allow us to find those corridors and opportunities for innovation, thereby reducing go-to-market risks and increasing the business success as such. Matthew, a few comments from you on how we work together.
Sure, and to some extent, when you look at this slide, it's really, as we work through projects with OSG and our clients, it's really a highly collaborative process where it's not that we do the front end necessarily and OSG does the back end. It's really we're working together. We're always together in workshops. It's a highly collaborative process in nature. And it's often referred to as a mixed methodology approach by a lot of our clients. Typically, our involvement in the early stage tends to be with qualitative research. One of the tools that we tend to use a lot on a lot of these types of projects is contextual inquiry, sometimes referred to as ethnographic research by some of our clients. And the goal here is really to put the user at the center and really see the problems from their viewpoint, from their perspective, and identify basically what are the truly unmet needs what are the pains that they're going through and what kind of frustration they're facing in everyday life. And the goal ultimately is really to frame meaningful problems and meaningful problem statements so that we can make sure that if we do any kind of ideation, it's really purposeful, it's guided, it's targeted, and it's not really based in any kind of hypothesis or guesses. We try to take the guesswork out of the equation. And so that translates into a very, very disciplined approach in terms of initial concept ideation. And this is where, when we work together through some more quantitative validation and testing and leveraging OSG strength there, we can really make sure that we that we really cover all the bases in terms of risk mitigation, and then we increase the chances for commercial success. And later down the deck, I think we'll cover a little bit about how that process unfolds and how we leverage the strength of all the different companies throughout the process.
Thank you, Matthew. So focusing now a little bit more on the power of the analytics approach, the whole idea here is to be able to uncover not only how do consumers or customers make decisions, but also why. The ability to understand what their current needs are, but also their future needs, and to be able to bring together the how and why in order for us to understand where are the gaps, where are the needs, how do we address them, and what new ways to solve those problems so that new innovations can be brought together more effectively. So we'll take you through that journey in a little bit more detail, and then come back to being able to put everything together between the two teams. So OSG typically starts with understanding both the cognitive and the behavioral aspects. So the cognitive aspects come from being able to look at unstructured data, various forms of unstructured data, whether they come from being able to look at social media, being able to capture information that is coming through a variety of different existing devices that are speaking, or just videos and human conversations about what people like or dislike about existing products and services that they interact with. With the ability to analyze this kind of information and the work that the Bressler Group does with understanding customer journey and the actual pain points, we now are able to filter these down into a set of benefits that go into our very powerful behavioral nudges tool called AceMap, which allows us to understand not only what's important to customers in improving the jobs that they do in addressing the constraints they face, but also how much more important is one benefit or another. As we then move from there to begin to understand where are the gaps, how is the market, how is the customer group segmented so that certain needs might be more relevant to certain groups and other needs may be addressed more effectively for a different set of groups, we then begin to design and develop new innovations. As we move forward to the next slides, I would ask if anyone has any questions, specific questions around our approach, around what we do. Please feel free to use the chat box and pose your questions. As soon as we complete this discussion or presentation, we'll bring forward to you responses to those particular questions and also follow it up with more detailed answers to them. Once again, this particular slide talks about the importance of understanding customer expectations and their current experiences so that the gaps can be very well addressed and future engagement can be served. This is where the joint relationship between Bressler and OSG can be very well addressed. Now, we do this through two platforms that we use. The first is a platform called AceMap. This was developed out of Stanford University, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. This platform drills down into understanding what's important to customers by how much more is one benefit or attribute more important than another, and how do we begin to look at and see those unmet needs and gaps. The second platform is an attempt to bring all of this information together on a platform called CAVI, which stands for Cognitive Analytics, Value Inference, and Intelligence. So today we know that understanding what's of value to customers, both today and in the future, is very important in driving new product innovation. Cavi is a big data platform that allows you to integrate a continuous voice of the customer, being able to incorporate in a real-time fashion customer complaints, customer pain, customer journeys, as the Bressler Group will talk about, and bringing all of that information together, analyzing that, following that up with leveraging AceMap, and being able to quantify and validate those needs and those gaps. The bringing together of these two powerful tools makes the journey of being able to address and capture innovation much more easier. So this brings us to the whole idea that customers are at the core, and empowering them, being able to bring forth an outside in thinking, being able to address their pain, their jobs that they need to do, and the constraints that they face today, and being able to leverage Cavi to get a 360 view on your customers while using AceMap to drill down deeper into an understanding of customer needs prioritization and a reflection of the gaps from existing offerings, whether they be products or service offerings. So our process is mapped out here in a simple 7-step process. It starts with customer journey mapping, from understanding awareness to consideration to current purchase reviews, being able to look at unstructured observations qualitatively through a variety of different techniques, and being able to leverage this to then workshop and assess in step 3 what are those jobs, what are the outcomes, constraints, and benefits customers seek, to be able to then feed this information into the tool called AceMap, which, when further data is collected on your customers and your prospects, will allow us then to assess the needs, assess the gaps, assess where these gaps are emerging from. Is there a small sliver of 10% of the customers who find issues that are not being addressed by current day product or services, and to be then moving on to the next step of testing, validating, and sizing these innovation opportunities using Cavi, and finally being able to continue this as a continuous stream, a closed loop stream of being able to gather the kind of feedback from your customers, being able to test them, to being able to size and validate and reflect whether the innovation you bring to the market is immediate and incremental, or whether it requires a set of new capabilities and developmental opportunities that might take a more amount of investment and time to accomplish. So let us start with the first step here, which is to understand customer journey mapping. And what we try to do is to look at customer consumption of products and services today, and we help understand what is happening at every stage of the customer journey. So we start off with understanding the actions. What is the customer doing at each stage? What actions are they taking to move themselves on to the next stage? We try to understand their motivations. Why? Why is the customer motivated? What jobs are they trying to accomplish? What emotions do they feel? And why do they even care about being engaged or not being engaged? Then we pause to see if there are questions that the customers feel. Are there uncertainties? Is there a reflection of uncertainty in terms of being able to use a product, not being able to understand what is going on? Or are there issues preventing the customer from moving to the next stage or the next phase of adoption, or having a better customer experience? We also at that stage understand barriers. What are the barriers to adoption? Is it the fact that the product or solution is not superior, does not give them enough advantage? Is it that the product has certain cost or complexity barriers? Or is it simply that existing products and solutions are not compatible with the workflow and the way that customers do things today, and requires additional people, additional time, or additional steps to be completed in order to move to the next stage? Let us give you an example here of a customer journey map that Matthew will take us through. Matthew?
Sure. And I would say a lot of what you just described is actually very instrumental also in kind of driving the definition of research protocol before we go out in the field. And this is just showing an example of a typical journey map for projects, which is really what is the culmination of our initial step of qualitative research, really when we go out in the field. And we come back from the field with a ton of unstructured data, so a lot of information which we need to figure out a way to visualize in some way. And again, here, this is a good example of where we leverage collaborative workshops where all together, OSG, Bressler Group, and the client work through the organization of that data. The intention here is really to come to what would be a common understanding, a common agreement around what the user perspective is. And really that forms the basis for being able to articulate at very specific points in the journey where some of the frustration occur most often. Again, the work we do is highly qualitative in nature, so the sample size tend to be on the smaller side. So I would say it varies between a dozen participants all the way to sub 100, but rarely over 100, because then that's where you start um, going into the realm of quantitative research. So collective effort to visualize, summarize, reach a common understanding, and really start to articulate specific pain points, frustration, and opportunities for innovation. And this is really the first step before we can articulate meaningful problem statements. Really make sure that the problem statements are connected back to a real identified user need. That way we have traceability. That way we can really make sure that whatever design effort or development effort that we would engage in would resonate with the end user. And that's really the purpose of this process. And if you compare this with what I would call the traditional approach, which is really when you don't either have the time or the inclination to really put the user in the center of that process, where you tend to rely on, your gut feel knowledge of the industry and make a lot of, hypothesis and assumption. This is where we think you can significantly reduce the risk of development. Again, putting the end user at the center of that development process. And so that's how we make sense of a lot of unstructured data. And OSG also leveraged technology to make sense and understand unstructured data and try to understand the why. And maybe Sukumar, you can cover some of that and some of the processes that you use.
Thank you, Matthew. So just keeping the conversation going along, OSG uses technologies like IBM Watson and various other proprietary technologies to take all the unstructured data that Matthew just talked about, and some of this may come from very few interviews, so it'll make sense to also add to it content analysis that is done by humans so that we can pull all of this together and allow the machine to also analyze this information and pull out sentiments, pull out expressions of emotions, pull out specific language that allows us to then convert it and workshop with you in order to be able to understand specifically what are those pain points and frustrations, where are those user needs that are not being addressed today, but are likely to be things that if solved would really be a good expression of a new innovation addressing future needs. And being able to begin to formulate these hypotheses, this long list of benefit statements that begin to help us say how new products or solutions will solve for these unmet needs, these user needs that are emerging into the future. So this is just an example of some joint work where we take into account numerous pain points and frustrations, begin to start to look at how they might be solved, and begin to look at now leveraging it in the next step where a survey is completed and the survey uses the AceMap technology. And in the AceMap technology, our customers or prospects are presented this large list of benefits that begin to talk about how they might solve or address existing pain points. It's not the actual solution, mind you, it's not a feature, but it's more to do with a benefit and how it addresses the jobs and the constraints that the pain points that the consumers or the customers face is then the data that is then collected allows us to look at what is the prioritization of these benefits and how do they vary by different customer segments, as you can see on this particular slide. So clearly, just as an example, benefits like low in calories and made with fresh ingredients is important to a group of customer segments that we call as busy weekday meal, and the jobs that they begin to address provide for comfort without any compromise. So being able to link these benefits and how customers want them, what is a prioritization, how much of a need there is a very important stage of this process. And these numbers that you see out there come from collecting data using AceMap. These numbers reflect how important is one benefit as compared to another in driving customer behavior change. The higher the number, the more important it is. If it is 200, it's 2 times the baseline of 100. This clearly begins to help us understand what the needs are and allows us then to begin to look at and see where the gaps are to start to take into account how we want to go forward. So AceMap, as we just talked about, is a great way to understand not only the how, but also the why. The benefits of AceMap, as I would point to the next slide here, when you go out and ask customers what's important to them on these large list of benefit statements, you get a lot of noise. You get fours and fives, you get culture making an impact on how customers respond to these surveys as compared to in AceMap, where the customer, whether it happens to be a nurse or a clinician in a hospital setting, or it happens to be a consumer, is forced to play a trade-off game, and the trade-off varies depending on how the customers respond to these questions. And in doing so, we help understand how do they mentally account for the various attributes and how important is one attribute as compared to another, and what is the entire hierarchy. Once this step is done, now AceMap is a technology that has been proven, it's been validated, it's shown to be the best when it comes to predictive accuracy, where we are looking at predicting customer behaviors and how you might be able to change those customer behaviors. The next step begins to help you understand an assessment of not only what's important to these customers, but also where are the gaps. So if you look at the simple 2x2 quadrant out here, the vertical axis allows you to understand from the south to the north how important is a benefit as compared to another. And then the horizontal axis teases out whether the needs are met or unmet, met being on the left side, unmet being on the right side. And so that allows us to identify 4 quick and interesting quadrants. The green quadrant telling us that these are opportunities, these are benefits that are important but are not being addressed today. The red quadrant telling us that these are benefits but they are already being met or addressed. So clearly, the green quadrant provides an opportunity for a new innovation definition. The red is a table stake. Having them will not necessarily create differentiation, but not having them will begin to will penalize you. The blue quadrant is one where, relatively speaking, these benefits are less important, but these are not being met. These are market shaping opportunities. These are opportunities for the future that, when addressed, would also be required to change and shape the marketplace, because these are important to a smaller emerging group of customers. This kind of analysis, this kind of deep thinking about the how and the why begins to help us create new innovations so that execution and product development begins to be very simple. So if you look at how we go about doing this particular simple thing is we start with knowing what's the job that is important, that allows us to identify attributes of benefits that are important and unmet. That in turn, as an example here, allows us to define. So in this case, let me know what the time is, no matter where I am, allows us to look at an analog watch as being a solution today. And then as time progresses, a digital watch begins to address the need for more accuracy and being able to use it for multiple purposes, like having a calculator on the watch. And that in turn starts to get us thinking about an even newer innovation in the same idea of having a watch, where now an iPhone is a great solution that begins to help you understand not only um, what time it is, what in what part of the world, allows you to do calculators, but also allows you to bring forth multiple different functions into the particular product. As we continue to shape the market, you start to see even more new emerging tools and themes, like being able to add your activity uh, sensors and being able to integrate all of these things into a different device. That doesn't actually kill the analog watch. It actually makes it more precious, and it makes it be used or applied for a different situation. And innovation then becomes a continuous process. Innovation then becomes one where we start to address them in different ways and speak to it more effectively. So we now then get into testing and validating, beginning to size the innovations, our ability to understand who will buy, where will they buy, when will they buy, and how much is their willingness to pay, all begins to get addressed because of the ability to have the data from AceMap that allows us to quantify. A simple example here is we build a great simulator that allows us to assess new innovations that you bring to the marketplace. How big is the market? So you start to look at from the simulator how big is the potential for one innovation versus another, and with the availability of other data, secondary data, we can start to see how big a volume will we begin to achieve. Finally, with the same data from AceMap, we are in a position to also assess the willingness to pay and assess what might be the optimal price for a bundle of benefits for an innovation that you look to bring to the marketplace. As you think about innovation, I think it's very critical to think of innovation as a continuous process, whether that be an incremental change, whether that be a next generation future new product that you want to bring to the marketplace. And with the ability to do this with so much of unstructured data, with so much of regular customer immersions and observations, being able to pull that together in a platform that identifies and assesses new opportunities and brings to the market the ability to test these new opportunities, validate if they are truly one that can bring forth a new innovation to the marketplace, provides you with great intensity of insights about your customers, about how their environments are changing, how they look to solve newer problems, and through that process, how can you stay in touch with them, offering not only a product improvement, but also offering opportunities through new data, new services, new support systems to make it a holistic experience and make it a continuously improving experience. And Cavi is a great technology product that, together with our partners here, begins to leverage and be able to solve for a continuous innovation process. So with that, let me leave you with the beginnings of this thought and ask my colleague Matthew from Bressler Group to also add on some additional examples towards a very disciplined approach to innovation. So involving the user or the customer early and often, both qualitatively and, as you saw, getting them to mentally account for what are those future unmet needs, reduces the product development risk and costs, and helps you increase the chance for successful launch and new product launches and commercial success. Matthew,
Yeah,
let
and
me
if I
turn.
can add, yeah, if I can add, so this is an example without getting too much into the detail. A good example of where a disciplined approach really turned a product that was initially introduced to the market that was not doing particularly well commercially, applying that disciplined approach, really going to the user, understanding what their needs were, and focusing the features and the design to address what these needs are, really translated into a complete redesign of this particular product, which is now listed as one of the top sellers on Amazon, and turned basically what was not working particularly well commercially into a really truly commercial success. So this is an example of the benefit of putting the user in the center and really applying a very disciplined approach to innovation.
And let us at this stage pause and see if there are any questions from our audience. We'd be happy to answer any questions at this time.
Thank you, Dr. Sukumar and Matthew. We do have some questions. First to Matthew. Matthew, you talked about this disciplined approach. Can you talk to us about the challenges associated with this approach, and how long does this approach take from start to finish?
So how long it takes from start to finish is usually it's a function of the complexity of the particular project, and usually mostly a function of how diverse the user groups for particular products or service might be. And so you can imagine that truly global product would require quite a bit more time and in-depth research than maybe a product that would be focused on the North America, for example. So scope and time really varies depending on the application and the end users. Remind me, first part of your question was?
How long does this, typically, how long does this process take from, say, start to finish?
So I would say for a very focused effort, limited market coverage, I think a project like this can probably take between 3-4 months. But when you expand to really truly global products with a more complex systems, it tends to run a little longer. So it could be as much as 8 to 10 months, maybe sometimes a full year, really depending on the scope and reach of the project.
Thank you, Matthew. Dr. Sukumar, you spoke about AceMap. Can you talk to us about any cultural bias that AceMap can address?
So when you do traditional surveys and ask questions of people about how important a particular benefit is or a particular need is on scales from 1 to 5 or scales from 1 to 10, you often see that people of different cultures respond in different ways. And they tend to gravitate towards different aspects of the scale. And it is well known and well documented that people from the East are more willing to be generous on that scale and give it a 4 or a 5, whereas those from central part of Europe tend to be more stricter about how they rate on these scales and tend to have 3s and 4s as the highest that they have to offer. The resulting aspect of using these kinds of survey scales doesn't allow you to judge what truly is important or what matters to people. It also creates considerable bias due to cultural differences. With AceMap, no matter what culture you are at, you're constantly looking at and assessing what matters to me and by how much more is one benefit more important than another. You're playing this game, we assess mentally how you account for it, and I'm getting a relative importance for each individual, each person, each respondent, each survey taker. I'm assessing how they react in this particular game so I can get a hierarchy of their needs, and I can easily compare that to an individual from a different geography or a different culture, and I could literally look at 2 DNAs and compare and understand where those unmet needs are and put them together collectively in order to see how I might lead global product development. So AceMap's a great tool that I would call as it being culture enabling rather than creating cultural biases.
And it's very telling, if I can jump in, Sukumar. Now I understand why, as a Frenchman, I tend to give people pretty low grades. So it's not my fault, it's cultural bias. I know that now.
Thank you. We have a question, another question. At some point in the development process, my experience being this is from an attendee, has been that R&D will identify features, claims that cannot be achieved. Does your process allow an immediate assessment of impact of not delivering certain features, claims, so that there is an immediate evidence-based decision of what is being given up?
The answer to that is absolutely. So we force our clients who bring features, because those tend to be ones that that R&D would gravitate to very quickly, and ask them to help understand what are the needs that they address, so that we can go out and test the needs before we test the features, and we are able to test the needs, the benefits, the claims, and come back with a well-designed, validated assessment whether those needs are meaningful, they're important, whether they will drive behavioral change, and then the ability to look at the feature to say, is that feature important to deliver? Because if the need itself is not important, and the need is not going to deliver a result, then a feature by itself is of no value. So being able to bring that kind of alignment is critical, and we are able to incorporate that in our process and help you with understanding if a particular feature addresses a need, but that need is out of the feature and the market needs to be shaped. If that is the case, then all the education around that claim, all the education around shaping the marketplace to begin to embrace that particular feature or claim can also be identified from the work we do out here to help you successfully launch a particular feature that the R&D feels very strongly about. Matthew, would you like to comment on that question?
Yeah, if I can add, I mean, I think often this is where technical innovation can come and play. There's, even if the need is justified, validated, there's often many different ways of addressing a need, maybe not as fully as with a particular technology, but often we find that there are multiple different ways to address a particular user need. And that's where it makes sense to leverage technical innovation sometimes.
Absolutely. And those can be through services, those can be through other kinds of approaches, and clearly being able to address that, knowing that the need exists, and then bringing the feature to the fore because it addresses a need is very critical.
Thank you, Dr. Sukumar and Matthew. One final question. Dr. Sukumar, you alluded to unstructured data. So can you talk to us about technologies that you have for analyzing unstructured data? That could be social media and other sources as well.
Absolutely. We use multiple technologies on our CAVI platform. IBM Watson is just one example. There are others like Google's Vector Plus, and we have some of our own technologies that help look at unstructured data in different ways and brings forth, and whether it's the unstructured data happens to be in the form of text, in the form of audio, in the form of video, and be able to then bring better content analysis around that to identify if there are sentiments expressed, if there are emotions expressed, and if so, what are those? And being able to then use that to summarize the jobs and outcomes, benefit statements, and pain points that customers are facing, being able to use that, leverage that, and marry that with, there's no substitute for direct customer immersion, but this sort of unstructured data can also be a great source to begin to spark good conversations during the customer observations and immersions during the ethnographies, so that together we can make the entire pool of needs that we assess, the future needs that we bring forth, to be so much more comprehensive, so much more exhaustive, that then the quantification and the validation becomes a much more meaningful step.
Matthew, would you like to add last comments before we close?
I would say that both for OSG and Bressler Group, we've been doing this for many years, and along the way we've developed a lot of best practice and templates and ways of addressing how we organize that unstructured data. And that translates in, best practice, best process that we've documented over the years. So there's a lot that we can bring to bear to projects like this. And this is where really the collaboration between the two firms, where we can each leverage really our, biggest strength, really makes a ton of sense.
Thank you, Matthew and Dr. Sukumar. We thank the audience for taking the time to attend, and we'll definitely be in touch with you on the recording and the presentation of this webinar. Thank you again, and wish you all a very good rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.